All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to CAM-ICB's webinar, the CMCA recertification process, keeping your CMCA up and your stress level down. My name is Virginia. I'm the credentialing assistant here at CAM-ICB, and I'd like to welcome Denise Davenport, the manager of credentialing services and marketing at CAM-ICB. So Denise, the first question is, what is recertification and why do we do it?
Well, the purpose of recertification is it's specific to a certification. That is a credential which is earned by taking a test and going through a series of exercises to obtain the certification and then to maintain it. So the purpose of recertification is really to demonstrate to your peers, your community, your colleagues, and your clients that you're dedicated to the profession and that you have a solid understanding of what it means to be a community association manager in an environment that we all know changes pretty dramatically. You also would want a certification if you're interested in enhancing your marketability and even increasing your wages. A study that was conducted by the Community Association Institute's Foundation, published in 2016, recognized that there was a 20% pay increase for people who held a certification or a credential.
Oh, wow. So recertification is definitely necessary in maintaining this credential to really increase your career potential here.
Yes, it is true.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead on to the next question here. So when managers need to recertify, obviously they'll need to find out, when they need to do this by. So how can managers find out what their recertification deadline is?
So the fastest way to find out when your recertification is due is to go to camicb.org and click Find a CMCA. It is in the public side of the camicb.org website, so you don't even need to log on. You just go to camicb.org, click Find a CMCA, and search by your name, and that's how you can find very quickly whether or not your recertification or your annual service fee is due. So when managers take the CMCA exam, depending on the time of year that they are awarded the certification, they go into one of two recertification cycles. One recertification cycle ends April the 1st, which is just around the corner, and the other one is October 1st. So managers, regardless of when they got the credential, they have to pay an annual service fee of $105. The annual service fee is going to be due either on April 1 or October 1, depending on your recertification cycle. Now, the recertification cycle is not every year like the annual service fee, but rather every 2 years. So from the date the certification is awarded, for example, if you were awarded the CMCA on February the 1st, you would go into the April 1 recertification cycle. So every 2 years on April 1st, you will need to submit 16 hours of continuing education in order to recertify your CMCA.
Okay, so just to confirm, every year a CMCA is going to have something due, either their annual service fee or both their annual service fee and recertification. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, yes.
Okay, so what happens if a manager does not recertify in time then?
When a manager's CMCA is terminated, in order to get it back, they have to go through a process which is called reinstatement. And reinstatement is sending in a reinstatement application and the reinstatement fee. And then there is a 1-year process, a reinstatement process that the manager has to fulfill in order to go back into the 2-year recertification cycle. So once the reinstatement application is approved, then that manager has 1 year to complete 16 hours of continuing education in order to get back on the 2-year recertification cycle.
Oh, wow. So it is in a manager's best interest to really keep an eye on those recertification deadlines.
Indeed, it is, yes.
All right, and I see here this is the Find a CMCA directory. So this is where a CMCA can search for their name and then find their credential renewal dates. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it's also important to note that oftentimes we get emails and phone calls from managers who are on the CAI website, that is caionline.org, and they don't see their CMCA credential on their name in that professional directory. And the reason for that is the CMCA is not a CAI designation, it is a CAM-ICB designation. So if you go to CAI online and you don't see your CMCA, the reason is you need to go to camicb.org.
Right, and the CMCA is separate from the AMS and the PCAM.
Correct.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on into how to recertify the CMCA. What is necessary to recertify the CMCA?
When managers, whether online or looking at the paper application, when they recertify, they are asked to recertify based on one of two criteria. One is having completed 16 hours of continuing education within the 2-year recertification cycle. The other one is whether or not they have an active approved credential. And that can be the AMS, the PCAM, those are both CAI designations. They can also be the Florida CAM or the Nevada CAM, those are licensures in those states. And the other one is the NAHC RCM, which is a cooperative housing designation. If you have had any of those for one full year prior to your recertification cycle, it is not necessary to submit 16 hours of continuing education. What you'll do is select the appropriate credential, enter your designation or license number, and then move on to the continuing education, I'm sorry, not the continuing education, the standards of conduct and ethics questions.
I see. So if a person has an AMS or a PCAM, they'll still be required to submit that application.
They are. And the reason for that is the application contains the standards of conduct and the ethics questions. And the manager has to certify by their signature and their responses to those questions that they have met those standards of conducts and standards of conduct and have also met those ethics requirements.
I see. So if a manager is submitting 16 hours of continuing education, would CAM-ICB have a record of all these hours?
CAM-ICB does not. It is the provider of the continuing education who maintains those records. Now, they maintain those records because it is part of their requirement for having their programs approved by CAM-ICB. It is not a requirement that they maintain those for the purpose of reporting on behalf of the manager. It is the manager's responsibility to track their continuing education credits and submit them with their recertification application, whether that's online or they submit a paper application.
I see. So it's important for managers to continually keep track of all their continuing education hours then, isn't it?
That's exactly right, yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead on to the next question. So when tracking all of their continuing education, how would a CMCA manager determine what counts as continuing education?
So in the CMCA handbook, and that is, it's the be-all end-all for any of the information we're talking about today, as well as taking the exam, continuing education requirements, and so forth, is very clear about education that qualifies for CMCA recertification has to meet one or of two criteria. It must pertain to the community association operations or management, or it contributes to the professional development of the manager. Now, professional development of the manager can be a number of things. It can be MS Word classes, it can be Excel classes, it can be effective communication, it can be managing conflict, it can be a lot of different things that helps the manager be a better manager in their community. And the community association operations or management is really quite specific. We have a lot of managers who also have real estate licenses, whether they're salespersons or they're brokers, and they ask if they can use those credits towards their continuing education requirement, and the answer is maybe. If those credits pertain to buying, selling, or investing in real estate or broker agency, the answer is no. If those credits pertain to those elements of real estate which overlap with community association management, like fair housing, support pets, safety, those sorts of issues, then yes, they would qualify.
I see. So if a manager has taken these continuing education classes for other programs, like for a real estate license, or if they find education that they feel would pertain specifically to their continuing professional development, how would they get that continuing education approved?
If the coursework has not been pre-approved by CAM-ICB, which is the provider of the education, has submitted a continuing education course provider application, had it reviewed by the CE review committee and been approved, the manager can apply for credit on their own. The requirements for the manager are not nearly as stringent as they are for the provider. All the manager has to do is, before the program, get pre-approval of the program that they are interested in attending. And you send the outline, an agenda, objectives, any information that you can give us about the program and why you think it would be helpful to your certification as a community manager. You email those to info@camicb.org.
Okay, and another question would be, so a lot of these continuing education opportunities that have been approved, many of these, are free or low cost. Where would CMCAs find this information of currently approved CMCA classes?
So every month, the CE review committee meets to review applications that have been submitted by business partners, vendors, everyone from landscapers to reserve study firms to law firms. And those applications are reviewed, and once they're approved, they are posted to camicb.org. And if you go to camicb.org and click continuing education, you'll see a link to the list of approved courses and providers. That link goes to a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, which you can sort by location, by format, either classroom or webinar, by the cost to attend the program, or the location and the number of credit hours.
I see. So moving on a little more into continuing education, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but let's kind of delve into more into what does not count as continuing education.
So what does not count as continuing education for purposes of CMCA recertification is the coursework that you may have done to get the CMCA. So if you've taken the M100, which is one of the 3 prerequisites to sitting for the exam, you cannot use that towards your CMCA recertification unless you took that M100 after you obtained the CMCA and already have the CMCA certification. The other coursework that doesn't count is, as I mentioned previously, any coursework that has to do with buying, selling, and investing in real estate. So real estate contracts, broker agency, representation, any coursework relative to conducting real estate does not qualify for community association management credit.
I see. So another question that I get a lot would be, some CMCAs might complete more than 16 hours of continuing education during their 2-year cycle. So maybe they completed 20 hours during their 2-year cycle, and they only are required to submit 16. Can CMCAs carry over credit that they completed during one 2-year recertification cycle to another?
No, they cannot. And the reason for that is the recertification requirements, when a manager completes that application, they are attesting that they have taken continuing education credits that keep them up to par and knowledge of those hot topics which affect the community association management industry. So credits that may have been taken, 2 or 3 years ago at a minimum may no, particularly when you're talking about laws and legislation, may not be relevant anymore.
Absolutely. As you mentioned before, this is a very ever-changing industry.
It is, yes.
So let's go ahead and move on. So there are a lot of options for continuing education, and I noticed that there are still even more options that are available. Would you mind going in depth on these particular options?
Yes, the CMCA handbook is really quite helpful, and all of the information that you all see here on the screen is in this handbook. The policy was designed in such a way to give managers a really broad scope and lots of opportunity for gaining continuing education credits to recertify their CMCA. Many management companies have their own in-house trainers, so in-house training can be used to satisfy the recertification requirement, but those credits are limited to 8 credits per recertification cycle, so no more than half. Now, in-house training, just to give you a little bit of guidance, is different from a management company bringing in an outside source to provide training. Bottom line is, whoever provides the continuing education is the entity which has to issue the certificate of attendance. So if ABC Management Company has their in-house trainer, Jane Trainer, she's conducting a program that is considered in-house training. If ABC Management Company has XYZ law firm come in to talk about new laws and changes to the laws coming in, that is not considered in-house training. So that's a very important distinction when people are trying to figure out what they can use for in-house credit and what they cannot. Managers can also use self-study credit. On-demand learning certification programs that are self-paced are really, really helpful, important, and they are a growing part of recertification and continuing education industry. So you can use self-study credits. That is limited to no more than 4 hours per recertification cycle. If you are Jane Trainer and you are doing the in-house training for your management company, you can earn credits for teaching that particular class. And those too are outlined in the CMCA handbook. Also, people who want to write articles for their management newsletters, their association newsletters, their professional development, professional membership newsletters can also get authorship credit for those projects.
Oh, wow. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities for CMCAs to earn credits.
Yeah,
Um,
yep.
and some CMCAs have, taken the option to go to, college courses and pursue their education in higher learning. Would any of these college courses count towards continuing education for the CMCA?
Yes, they absolutely do. We're seeing more than when I started here. Um, Requests from people who are working on their graduate degrees, for example, or even working on their bachelor's degrees. Courses like accounting, conflict management, working with people, budgeting, any type of program that you would use in your day-to-day operations or managing your community association do qualify for CMCA recertification credit, provided that they have been pre-approved by CAM-ICB.
Absolutely. It's always important if you haven't had your CMCA education approved to go ahead and have that submitted just to be sure that it can count.
Right.
All right, so let's go on to the next page here. I know we've touched on this briefly before, why we need to answer these questions on the CMCA certification application, especially how it pertains to the NCCA accreditation.
Right. So the CMCA program is accredited by NCCA, and NCCA is the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. It is a third-party accreditation agency which certifies, it's an independent third-party program that certifies programs to become certification programs. So what that means is there's an outside organization that makes us follow policies and procedures that have been established by the CAM-ICB Board of Commissioners, and we have to report to NCCA every year to make sure that we are abiding by those guidelines. Therefore, CAM-ICB cannot offer continuing education to its certificates because that's like the check writer signing the check. We don't offer CMCA study courses because that would be like the certification board teaching managers how to pass the test. So it's a direct conflict of interest to be able to offer continuing education based on this NCCA accreditation. CAMICB is also in response to the volume of international managers who have become interested in the CMCA. We're seeking ANSI accreditation, that's the American National Standards Institute accreditation for the CMCA program. And those two have very strict guidelines about what we ask managers to do for their recertification. So we can't have a CMCA out there with their using their CMCA digital badge, using their CMCA logo behind their name, without knowing that that CMCA has adhered to what are quite strict standards of conduct and ethical guidelines.
I see. So signing this recertification application does have a lot of weight to it. So what does it really mean that when they sign this application?
What it means is they're signing the application attesting to having not broken any laws, not having had a license revocated or suspended, and that they have followed the rules of conduct in representing their community association.
Absolutely, and that's very important for all of our CMCA managers. Well, let's go on to our next slide here. We do have a wonderful list of useful resources that are available to our CMCA managers. Denise, did you want to touch on some of these tools available?
Yes, I would. I'd also like to mention that under the Handouts tab, you will find two PDF files. One is a PDF of this PowerPoint presentation. The other one is the CMCA recertification application. And many of the graphics that you saw in today's slide, you'll recognize when you open up that application. I've mentioned the CMCA handbook several times. I can't mention it enough. It is a great resource for managers who are interested in gaining the certification and maintaining the certification. Pretty much any question that you have about recertification or applying to sit for the exam and those requirements are in the CMCA handbook. And there is a link here in the presentation to that handbook. It's also on camicb.org. The CMCA Standards of Professional Conduct, you will also see lots of content in that document, which is also in the handbook, which is also on the recertification application, which is also on the exam application. It's really important for CAMICB to cross-reference those standards just to drive home the point that this certification program does have qualifications that managers need to adhere to. And then the CMCA recertification application, which I mentioned is also included in the handout, you can also get from camicb.org. We also have a question here. How much would the M204 count as? The M204 is an M-level management class that is given by the Community Associations Institute. Because it's a CAI product, I don't know the answer to that question right off the top of my head, but I do know that if you go to caionline.org and click, I think it's online learning, there is a link on the left-hand side called M200, and if you click that link, you will find out how many credit hours they are. I think that one's worth probably 12 or 14.
I just checked. It looks like the M204 is worth 14 hours of continuing education credit.
There you
So,
go.
yep, the M200 levels and the PMDP courses in particular from CAI are worth upwards to 12 to 16 credit hours each.
Perfect. Okay, great. And then we have another question. If in Florida, are we required to take any CAI classes or just the Florida continuing ed? I was advised I was required to do one CAI class every 2 years. The short answer to your question is that because the CMCA program is accredited by NCCA, it cannot source continuing education. So the requirement to maintain your CMCA is not contingent on you getting your education from one provider or another, which is why the list of CE course provider, CE courses that have been pre-approved by CAMICB is on the website. Certainly CAI courses have sought approval, and the CAI chapters. So if there's a requirement that you have one class that is a CAI class, it does not have anything to do with your CMCA. It might very well be for another designation or a certification.
And I'd also like to touch on the fact that Florida has a CAM license, and CAM-ICB will accept the Florida CAM license in lieu of the 16 hours of continuing education for recertification.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's true. And then we have another question. It asks, how does degreed play into CEs? Degreed, if I remember correctly, is the Associa in-house training, professional training. Associa courses, some have sought approval, some have not. If you wanted to make sure that this the degreed class had was approved, you would go to camicb.org, look at that list of approved courses. If the course is not on there, then you would submit it yourself with the outline and agenda to info@camicb.org.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one other question here. If we're studying for an AMS and we take 2 M200 courses for the certification, would that cover our 16 hours of credits needed for CMCA? Each M200 class is showing 12 CEUs, or did we need to mix it up with different types? No, it doesn't need to be mixed up with different types of classes. So let's just say you got your CMCA, you were awarded in December of 2018, and now you're working on your AMS. And in March of 2019, you take one M200 level class, and in March of 2020, you take another M200 level class, and your recertification is due April the 1st of 2020, then both of those classes would qualify. It doesn't really matter how you slice, dice, and julienne the classwork, as long as it is 16 hours in that 2-year recertification cycle. And then, I'm sorry, Virginia, go ahead.
Oh, I was actually going to mention that we do have one more question here. If you must recertify by 10/1/19, when is the soonest you can submit the recertification application?
That, so the October 1st recertification cycle opens in July of that year. So if you wanted to submit your recertification prior to July 1, you would send in the paper application. It won't allow you to do that online. And so you can, after July 1st, after you get that first notice, and I also wanted to mention too about how frequently we contact managers to let them know their recertification is coming due. The first notice goes out for the October cycle, July 1. So once you get that notice, you know that the recertification cycle is open and you can go ahead and recertify online. Keep in mind though that if you recertify online, you have to pay at the same time. You won't be able to do those processes independent of one another. They have to be done together. So you can either go online or you can submit your paper application and it can be processed manually.
Okay, well, it looks like we are just about at time, so we'll go ahead and end our webinar here. We do have a couple more questions, so we will go ahead and follow up with any additional questions that were submitted by email, and you can expect that from info@camicb.org. And you can also submit any additional questions you have to info@camicb.org. We typically have a turnaround time of about 1 to 2 business days. Thank you so much for everyone for joining, and we're really glad to have a good turnout. So if you have any questions, you can, as I mentioned again, contact us at info@camicb.org, or by phone at 703-970-9330. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.